Hello. This is John T. Rhapsodes, Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories, bringing you a funny Irish ghost story today from 1838 by Sheridan Le Fanu, called The Ghost and the Bonesetter. Sheridan Le Fanu walked the earth from 1814 to 1873, mostly in Ireland. The Ghost and the Bonesetter was first among a series of 12 short stories that were said to have been from the papers of a fictional 18th century Catholic priest named Father Purcell. The collection of stories was published as the Purcell Papers. Essentially, today's story is told by Sheridan Le Fanu, who is telling a story from Father Purcell, who, in turn, tells a story a son told him about his father, Terry Neal. In other words, this is a story about Terry Neal. If you like awesome old-school audio stories, from old minds that were once young minds, brought to you free of charge and with a happy and grateful heart, consider while listening to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications to get notice of new stories, some funny, some spooky, all awesome, usually at least once a week. These simple acts will help this channel immensely. And now, hear the words of old. The Ghost and the Bonesetter, from 1838, by Sheridan Le Fanu. In looking over the papers of my late valued and respected friend, Father Francis Purcell, who for nearly 50 years discharged the arduous duties of a parish priest in the south of Ireland, I met with the following document. It is one of many such, for Father Purcell was a curious and industrious collector of old local stories and traditions, a commodity in which the quarter where he resided mightily abounded. The collection and arrangement of such local legends was, as long as I knew him, his cherished hobby. But I had never learned that his love of the marvelous and whimsical had carried him so far as to prompt him to commit the results of his inquiries to writing, until his last will and testament put me in possession of all his manuscript papers. It is perhaps necessary to add that the superstition illustrated by the story that follows is prevalent throughout the south of Ireland, namely, that the corpse last buried in a cemetery is obliged, during his juniority of interment, to supply his brother tenants of the churchyard in which he lies with fresh water to allay the burning thirst of purgatory. The writer can vouch for the prevalence of this superstition with a case in which a respectable and wealthy farmer, on the borders of Tipperary, in tenderness to the corns on the feet of his departed helpmeet wife, enclosed in her coffin 2 pairs of brogue boots, a light and a heavy pair, the one for dry, the other for sloppy weather, seeking thus to mitigate the fatigues of her inevitable perambulations in procuring water and administering it to the thirsty souls of purgatory in her cemetery. Fierce and desperate conflicts have ensued when 2 funeral parties approached the same churchyard together, each endeavoring to secure to his own relative priority of burial, and a consequent immunity from the water distributing tax levied upon the pedestrian powers of the last comer to the grave. An instance not long since occurred, in which one of 2 such parties, through fear of losing to their deceased friend this advantage of not being buried last, made their way to the churchyard by a shortcut, and, in violation of one of their strongest prejudices, actually threw the coffin over the wall, lest time should be lost in making their entrance through the churchyard gate. Innumerable instances of the same kind might be quoted, all tending to show how strongly among the peasantry of South Ireland this superstition is entertained. However, I shall not detain the reader further by any more prefatory remarks, but shall proceed to lay before him the following. The following is an extract from the manuscript papers of the late Reverend Francis Purcell of Drumculog. Before proceeding further, I tell the following particulars as nearly as I can recollect them in the words of the narrator. It may be necessary to observe that he was what is termed a well-spoken man, having for a considerable time instructed the ingenious youth of his native parish in such of the liberal arts and sciences as he found it convenient to profess, a circumstance which may account for the occurrence of several big words in the course of the following narrative, more distinguished for euphonious effect than for correctness of application. I proceed, then, without further preface, to lay before you the wonder adventures of Terry Neal. Why, then, 'tis a strange story, and as true as you're sitting there. And I'd make bold to say there isn't a boy in the 7 parishes could tell it better than meself, for 'twas me father himself it happened to, and many's the time I heard it out of his own mouth. And I can say, and I'm proud to say, that me father's word was as credible as any squire's oath in the country, and would sign on if a poor man got into any unlucky trouble, to go into the court to help prove the man's case. But that doesn't properly signify. He was as honest and as sober a man, barring he was a little bit too partial to the glass, as you'd find in a day's walk. And there wasn't the likes of him in the country round for labouring, and he was mighty handy entirely for carpenter's work, and mending old fences and furniture, and the likes of that. And so he took up with bone setting, as was most natural, for none could match his skill of mending the leg of a stool or a table, and sure there never was a bone setter that got so much work, man or child, young and old, and there never was such breaking and mending of bones known in the memory of man. Well, Terry Neal, for that was me father's name, began to feel his heart growing light and his purse heavy, and he bought a bit of a farm in Squire Phelan's ground, just under the old castle, and a pleasant little spot it was. And day and morning, poor creatures not able to put a foot to the ground, with broken arms and broken legs, would be coming rambling in from all quarters to have their bones spliced up. Well, your honour, all this was as well could be, but it was customary when Sir Phelan would go anywhere out to the country, for some of the tenants to sit up to watch in the old castle, just for a kind of compliment to the old family, and a mighty unpleasant compliment it was for the tenants, for there wasn't a man of them but knew there was something strange and haunted about the old castle. The neighbours had it that the squire's old grandfather was as good a gentleman, God be with him, as I heerd as ever stood in shoe leather. His ghost used to keep walking about in the middle of the night, ever since he died by bursting a blood vessel, pulling out a cork out of a bottle, as you or I might be doing, and will too, please God. But that doesn't signify. So, as I was saying, the old squire used to come down out of the frame where his portrait was hung up, to break the bottles and glasses, God be merciful to us all, and drink all he could come at, and a small blame to him for that same. And then, if any of the family would be coming in, he would be up again in his portrait, looking as quiet and innocent as if he didn't know anything about it, the mischievous old chap. Well, your honour, as I was saying, One time the family up at the castle was staying in Dublin for a week or two, and so, as usual, some of the tenants had to sit up in the castle, and the third night it came to me father's turn. "Oh, tear on wounds, or tear my wounds," says me father unto himself. "And must I sit up all night with that old vagabond of a spirit, glory be to God, serenading through the house and doing all sorts of mischief?" However, there was no getting out of it, and so he put a bold face on it, and he went up at nightfall with a bottle of poteen, or Irish moonshine, and another bottle of holy water. It was raining smart enough, and the evening was darksome and gloomy when me father got in. And what with the rain he got, and the holy water he sprinkled on himself, it wasn't long till he had to swallow a cup of the poteen to keep the cold out of his heart. It was the old steward, Lawrence Connor, that opened the door, and he and me father got along very well. So when he seen who it was, and me father told him how it was his turn to watch in the castle, Lawrence offered to sit up along with him, and you may be sure me father wasn't sorry for the same. So says Larry, "We'll have a bit of fire in the parlour," says he. "And why not in the hall?" says me father, for he knew that the old squire's portrait was hung in the parlour. "No fire can be lit in the hall," says Lawrence, "for there's an old jackdaw's nest in the chimney." "Oh, then," says me father, "let us stop in the kitchen, for it's very improper for the likes of me to be sitting in the parlour," says he. "Oh, Terry Neal, that can't be," says Lawrence. "If we keep up the old custom at all, we may as well keep it up properly," says he. "Devil sweep the old custom," says me father, to himself, do you mind, for he didn't like to let Lawrence see that he was afraid. "Oh, very well," says me father. "I'm agreeable, Lawrence," says he. And so down they both went to the kitchen, until the fire was lit in the parlour, and that same wasn't long doing. Well, your honour, they soon went up again and sat down mighty comfortable by the parlour fire, and they began to talk and to smoke and to drink a small taste of the poteen. And, moreover, they had a good rousing fire of bogwood and turf to warm their shins over. Well, sir, as I was saying, they kept conversing and smoking together most agreeable, until Lawrence began to get sleepy, as was but natural for him, for he was an old servant man and was used to a great deal of sleep. "Sure, it's impossible," says me father. "But are you getting sleepy?" "Oh, devil a taste," says Larry. "I'm only shutting me eyes to keep out the perfume of the tobacco smoke that's making them water. So don't you mind other people's business," says Larry, stiff enough, for he had a mighty high stomach of his own, rest his soul. "And go on," says Larry, "with your story, for I am listening," while shutting his eyes. Well, when me father seen speaking was no use, because Lawrence was determined to sleep, he went on with his story. By the same token, it was the story of Jim Sullivan and his old goat he was telling, and a pleasant story it is, and there was so much diversion in it that it was enough to waken a dormouse, let alone to prevent a Christian from going to sleep. But the way me father told it, I believe there never was the likes heard since nor before, for he bawled out every word of it as if the life was fairly leaving him, trying to keep old Larry awake. But it was no use, for the hoarseness came on him, and before he came to the end of his story, Larry O'Connor began to snore like bagpipes. "Oh, for crying out loud," says me father, "isn't this a hard case?" says he. "That old villain letting on to be me friend, and to go asleep this way, and us both in the very room with the spirit," says he. "The cross of Christ about us," says me father. And with that he was going to shake Lawrence to waken him, but he just remembered if he roused him, that he'd surely go off to his bed and leave him completely alone, and that would be far worse. "Fine, then," says me father. "I'll not disturb the poor boy. It would be neither friendly nor good-natured," says he, "to torment him while he is asleep. Only I wish I was the same way, meself," says he. And with that, he began to walk up and down and saying his prayers until he worked himself into a sweat. But it was all no good. So he drunk about a pint of spirits to compose his mind. "Oh," says me father, "I wish to the Lord I was as easy in me mind as Larry there. Maybe," says he, "if I tried, I could go asleep." And with that, he pulled a big armchair close beside Lawrence and settled himself in it as well as he could. But there was one strange thing I forgot to tell you. He couldn't help, in spite of himself, looking now and then at the portrait, and he immediately observed that the eyes of it was following him about, and staring at him, and winking at him wherever he went. "Oh," says me father, when he seen that, "it's a poor chance I have," says he, "and bad luck was with me the day I came into this unfortunate place. But anyway, there's no use in being frightened now," says he, "for if I am to die, I may as well perspire undaunted." Well, your honour, he tried to keep himself quiet and aisy, and he thought 2 or 3 times he might have went to sleep, but for the way the storm was groaning and creaking through the great heavy branches outside, and whistling through the old chimneys of the castle. Well, after one great roaring blast of the wind, you'd think the walls of the castle was just going to fall, quiet and clean, with the shaking of it. All of a sudden, the storm stopped, as silent and as quiet as if it was a July evening. Well, your honour, it wasn't stopped blowing for 3 minutes, before me father thought he heard a sort of noise over the chimney-piece. And with that, me father just opened his eyes the smallest taste in life, and sure enough, he seen the old squire getting out of the portrait, for all the world as if he was throwing off his riding coat, until he stepped out clean and complete out of the chimney-piece, and thrown himself down on the floor. Well, the old chap, and me father thought it was the dirtiest turn of all, before he began to do anything out of the way, the spirit stopped for a while to listen if both men were asleep. And as soon as the spirit thought all was quiet, he put out his hand and took hold of the whiskey bottle, and drank at last a pint of it. Well, your honour, when he took his turn out of it, he settled it back mighty cute entirely, in the very same spot it was in before. And he began to walk up and down the room, looking as sober and as solid as if he never done the likes at all. And whenever he went a past me father, he thought he smelled a great scent of brimstone, and it was that frightened me father entirely, for he knew it was brimstone that was burned in hell. At any rate, he often heard it from Father Murphy, and he had a right to know what belonged to it. He's dead since, God rest him. Well, your honour, me father was easy enough until the spirit came past him so close, God be merciful to us all, that the smell of the sulphur took the breath clean out of his. And with that, me father took such a fit of coughing that it almost shook him out of the chair he was sitting in. "Ho, ho," says the old squire, stopping short about 2 steps aft and turning round facing me father. "Is it you that's in that chair? And how's all with you, Terry Neal?" "At your honour's service," says me father, as well as the fright would let him. "And it's proud I am to see your honour tonight," says he. "Terence," says the old squire, "you're a respectable man," and it was true, "an industrious, sober man, and an example of inebriety to the whole parish," says he. "Thank your honour," says me father, getting courage. "You were always a civil-spoken gentleman, God rest your honour." "Rest, my honour," says the sparret, fairly getting red in the face with the madness. "Rest, my honour," says he. "Why, you ignorant spalpeen," says he, "where did you leave your manners? If I am dead, it's no fault of mine, and it's not to be thrown in my teeth at every hand's turn by the likes of you," says he, while stamping his foot on the floor that you'd think the boards would smash under him. "Oh," says me father, "I'm only a foolish, ignorant, poor man." "You're nothing else," says the squire. "But, anyway," says he, "it's not to be listening to your gossip, nor conversing with the likes of you that I came up, down, I mean," says he. And as little as the mistake was, me father took notice of it. "Listen to me now, Terence Neale," says the spirit. "I was always a good master to Patrick Neale, your grandfather." "'Tis true, for your honour," says me father. "And, moreover, I think I was always a sober right gentleman," says the squire. "That's your name, sure enough," says me father, though it was a big lie for him, but he could not help it. "Well," says the spirit, "although I was sober as most men, at least as most gentlemen," says he, "and I thought I was at different periods a most extempore Christian, and most charitable and inhuman to the poor. For all that, I'm not as easy where I am now as I had a right to expect." "And more's the pity," says me father. "Maybe your honour would wish to have a word with Father Murphy." "Hold your tongue, you miserable bliggard," says the old squire. "It's not of me soul I'm thinking, and I wonder that you'd have the impudence to talk to a gentleman concerning his soul, and when I want that fixed," says he, slapping his thigh. "As I said, it's not me soul," says the old squire, sitting down opposite of me father, "that's annoying me the most. I'm uneasy about my right leg that I broke the day I accidentally killed my horse, Black Barney." Me father found out after. It was the old squire's favourite horse that fell under him, after leaping the big fence that runs along the glen. "I hope," says me father, "your honour's not uneasy about the killing of him." "Hold your tongue, ye fool," said the old squire, "and I'll tell you why I'm uneasy on me leg. In the place where I spend most of my time, except the little leisure I have for looking about me here, I have to walk a great deal more than I ever was used to," says he, "and by far more than is good for me either. For I must tell ye, the people where I am is uncommonly fond of cold water, for there is nothing better to be had. And, moreover, the weather is hotter than is altogether pleasant. And I am appointed to assist in carrying the water, and gets a mighty poor share of it myself," says he. "For they're all of them surprisingly thirsty, and drinks it as fast as me legs can carry it. But what kills me entirely is the weakness in me leg, and I want you to give it a pull or two to bring it into shape," says he. "And that's the long and the short of it." "Oh, please, your honour," says me father, for he didn't like to handle the sperrit at all. "I wouldn't have the impudence to do the likes to your honour," says he. "It's only to poor creatures like meself that I set bones." "None of your blarney," says the old squire. "Here's me leg," says he, holding it up to me father. "Pull it for the bare life," says he, "and if you don't, by the immortal powers, I'll not leave a bone in your carcass I'll not powder." When me father heard that, he seen there was no use in pretending, so he took hold of the leg, and he kept pulling and pulling, till the sweat, God bless us, began to pour down his face. "Pull, you devil," says the squire. "At your service, your honour," says me father. "Pull harder," says the squire. Me father pulled it like the devil. "I'll just take a little sip to keep up me courage," says the squire, reaching over his head to the bottle, acting like he was weak. However, he took the wrong bottle. "Here's to your good health, Terence," says the old squire. "And now pull, like the very devil." And with that, the old ghost lifted the bottle of holy water to drink. But it was hardly to his mouth when he let out a screech so loud you'd think the room would fairly split with it, and the old squire jerked back so hard that his leg was torn clean off, remaining in me father's hands. Down went the old squire over the table, and bang went me father halfway across the room on his back upon the floor, knocking me father out. When he came to, the cheerful morning sun was shining through the windy shutters, and me father was lying flat on his back, with the leg of one of the great old chairs pulled clean out of the socket and tight in his hand, pointing up to the ceiling, and old Larry fast asleep and snoring as loud as ever. Me father went that morning to Father Murphy, and from that to the day of his death he never neglected confession nor mass, and what he told was better believed that he spoke of it but seldom. And as for the old squire, the spirit that is, whether it was he did not like his liquor, or by reason of the loss of his leg, he was never known to walk out of the portrait again. And that concludes Sheridan Le Fanu's 1838 story called The Ghost and the Bonesetter. This is John T. Rhapsodes, Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Thank you for listening. You can hear more stories like this in the channel's playlists. Find them by staying tuned for the last 20 seconds of this video and clicking on the end screen icons. You can also go to the channel homepage and click on the playlist tab. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please help me earn the warm embrace of Mr. and Mrs. YouTubes, who look with loving favor upon those channels whose listeners faithfully download the YouTube app, create an account, subscribe to this channel, like, comment, click the notification bell, and share the videos with their friends so that they too can hear the words of old.